My daughter-in-law smiled at me from across the dinner table 3 nights before she tried to have me declared legally incompetent, and I remember thinking she had the warmest eyes I had ever seen on a stranger. I am Walter Holt, 67 years old, retired civil engineer, and 6 weeks ago I was sitting in a memory care facility in Tucson with a paper cup of pills I was not supposed to be taking, watching my son sign paperwork that would have handed him every dollar my wife and I spent 40 years building together. My wife, Lorraine, passed 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand through every one of those 77 days, and I have not once apologized for the man I became in the weeks after she was gone. Grief does things to a person. It hollows you out like a dry riverbed. You forget to eat. You forget to return phone calls. You start talking to photographs. My son, Brendan, noticed. He called me every evening for 2 months after the funeral. He drove up from Phoenix on weekends. He sat with me in the kitchen where his mother used to make her Sunday biscuits, and he told me he was worried. He said I seemed confused sometimes. He said he had noticed I had left the stove on twice. He said his wife, Teresa, had a background in elder care and she thought it might be worth having me evaluated. I thought he was being a good son. I was wrong about that in a way that still takes my breath away when I think about it too long. The evaluation was at a place called Sunridge Wellness Center, which sounds like somewhere you go to do yoga and drink green smoothies. It is not that. It is a facility on the east side of Tucson with fluorescent lighting and a front desk that smells like industrial cleaner and something else underneath. Something tired. Teresa drove me. She held my arm in the parking lot. She brought a canvas tote bag with my name written on it in black marker, already packed with 3 days' worth of clothes and my toiletries. I did not realize until later that she had packed that bag before we left my house. The intake nurse asked me questions. What year is it? Who is the president? Count backward from 100 by sevens. I answered everyone correctly, though I will admit the backward counting made me feel like I was being graded on a quiz I had not studied for. The nurse wrote things down. She did not smile much. They told me I would stay for observation. A standard 48-hour cognitive assessment. Nothing to worry about. On the second morning, a doctor I had never met came to my room and explained that the assessment had flagged some areas of concern. He used words like mild cognitive impairment and functional decline and supervised living environment. He had a file folder with my name on it. The handwriting in the margins was Teresa's. That was the first moment I understood what was happening to me. Not the second, not the fifth, the first. Because there is a specific kind of cold that settles in your chest when you realize the person who packed your bag already knew you were not coming home. I asked to call my son. Brendan arrived that afternoon. He was wearing a pressed button-down shirt, which he never does on a Tuesday. He shook the doctor's hand like they had met before. He sat down across from me in the consultation room with his elbows on the table and his hands clasped together, and he said, "Dad, we all think this is the safest option right now. We all." I asked him who the we was. He looked at the floor for a moment. Then he said, "The family, Dad. We just want what's best for you." My son did not look at me the way a person looks at someone they love. He looked at me the way a person looks at a problem they have finally figured out how to solve. I had a heart condition, atrial fibrillation, managed with medication. I had blood pressure issues. My doctor in Phoenix had adjusted my prescriptions twice in the past year. None of that constitutes incompetence. None of that means a man cannot manage his own bank accounts or sign his own name on his own property. But I was learning, sitting in that consultation room under fluorescent light, that the paperwork does not particularly care about nuance. I was placed in what they call the transitional care unit. My own clothes were replaced with facility-issued clothing tagged with my room number. My phone was kept at the front desk for safekeeping. I was told I could have it back once I had settled in. I never got it back. What I got instead was a small white cup 3 times a day with pills in it that were not the pills my doctor had prescribed. I am not a medical professional, but I spent 40 years working on infrastructure projects where attention to detail was the difference between a bridge that stood and a bridge that did not. I pay attention. I read labels. The capsules they were giving me were a pale yellow that I did not recognize, and when I asked the nurse what they were, she said they were part of my treatment protocol as determined by the admitting physician. The admitting physician was someone I had met once, On the 5th day, I hid the pills under my tongue and spit them into the paper cup when the nurse turned away. I did this for 3 days in a row. By the 8th day, the fog I had not fully noticed was lifting. I'd been walking through a kind of gauze since I arrived, and I had assumed it was grief or adjustment or just being 67 years old in a new place. It was not grief. By the 9th day, I was clear-headed enough to start doing what I have always done when I need to solve a problem. I observed. I cataloged. I made a plan. My roommate was a 78-year-old retired school teacher named August, who had more books than the facility's common room library and who was, despite what his family seemed to believe, absolutely lucid. August had been placed there by his daughter after his wife died, which I recognized as a pattern I was developing a strong dislike of. August also had a contraband cell phone tucked inside the spine of a hollowed-out hardcover of the complete works of Mark Twain. He let me use it on a Thursday afternoon while his aide was at lunch. I called my attorney. His name is Clifton Murray. I've used him for property closings and estate planning for 22 years. He is the kind of man who answers his own phone, which in my experience is the clearest indicator of trustworthiness available to the general public. I told him where I was. I told him what had happened. I told him about the pills. He was quiet for longer than I expected. Then he said, "Walter, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your son filed a petition for guardianship 8 days ago. There is a hearing scheduled in 19 days. If he is granted guardianship, he will have legal authority over your medical decisions and your finances." I sat on August's bed and looked at the wall. "The estate," I said. "Your property in Tucson alone is valued at $420,000, Clifton said, plus the investment accounts, the life insurance payout from the Rains policy, the retirement funds. Walter, we are talking about somewhere between $1.2 and $1.4 million depending on current market positions." I thought about Teresa's canvas bag. "Already packed. What do I need to do?" I said. What I needed to do was get documentation. Clifton explained it to me slowly and clearly. I needed to demonstrate cognitive competency through an independent evaluation. I needed evidence that the medication I had been given was not what was prescribed. I needed, if at all possible, some record of my son and daughter-in-law's intentions beyond reasonable interpretation of concern. I had 19 days. I started with the medication. August knew one of the overnight aides, a young woman named Rosie who was finishing her nursing degree and who had confided in him that she was deeply uncomfortable with some of the prescribing patterns she had observed at Sunridge. I did not ask her to do anything illegal. I asked her if she could tell me the name of what was in my cup. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, that what I was being given included a benzodiazepine that was not on my admission records as a prescribed medication, and that it appeared to have been added to my protocol via a physician's note she had not seen signed in person. I asked her if she would be willing to write that down on a piece of paper, date it, and sign her name to it. She thought about it for 20 seconds. Then she said yes. I folded that paper into the back of my left shoe. The second thing I needed was harder. I needed to know what Brendan and Teresa were actually doing while I sat in a room with a paper cup of pills. Clifton reached out to a contact of his, a woman named Judith, who ran a small private investigation firm in Phoenix. She was thorough and she was discreet, and she found what she found in 11 days. The mortgage on my son's house had been 3 months in arrears when I was admitted to Sunridge. He owed the IRS $47,000 in back taxes from a failed business venture he had never mentioned to me, a landscaping company he had started with a partner who turned out to be moving money in ways that attracted federal attention. The business partner was cooperating with investigators. Brendan was not technically a target, but he was in the proximity of significant legal and financial pressure. Teresa had a sister in Nevada who was a paralegal. The sister had drafted the initial guardianship petition. The sister had also, 3 days before I was admitted, listed herself as a reference contact for Brendan on the application to transfer management of my investment accounts. The sister was not someone I had ever met. Judith found one more thing. She found a text exchange, obtained legally through a civil process I will not detail, between Brendan and Teresa from the week before my admission. I read it twice in Clifton's office after he had driven to Tucson to see me in person. The first text, from Teresa to Brendan, said, "Dr. Reeve, Arnett said 6 to 8 weeks of the protocol before the evaluation clears. By then the petition is already filed. It's cleaner this way." The second text, from Brendan to Teresa, said, "What about the house? It goes to probate if we're not careful." The third, from Teresa, said, "It won't. I already talked to Annette. We file the moment the guardianship clears. He can stay at Sunridge. Honestly, at that point, he won't know the difference. He won't know the difference." I read that sentence 4 times. I am not a man who cries easily. I learned to manage my emotions on construction sites where showing weakness cost you authority and sometimes safety. But I sat in that small office with my attorney and I put the page down and I pressed my fist against my mouth and I breathed through my nose until the feeling passed. My son thought I would not know the difference. He forgot that I built things for a living. He forgot that I spent 4 decades reading blueprints and calculating loads and finding the flaw in a structure before it became a catastrophe. He forgot that the thing I am best at, the thing I have always been best at, is seeing exactly what a thing is made of before it falls apart. I had 12 days before the hearing. Clifton filed a motion for an emergency independent cognitive assessment through a court-appointed neuropsychologist. He filed a concurrent motion questioning the validity of the prescribing documentation at Sunridge. He contacted the Arizona Adult Protective Services with Rosie's written statement and the medication discrepancy, and he made a call to a journalist he knew at the Arizona Republic who covered healthcare regulation, not to run a story, but to have the conversation be on record somewhere that mattered. I stayed at Sunridge. This was Clifton's advice and I followed it, though it was one of the harder things I have done in recent memory. I took my pills to the nurse, nodded, and disposed of them when I could. I was cooperative and pleasant. I played Scrabble with August on Tuesday afternoons. I attended the group cognitive activities with every appearance of a man who was right where he belonged. I was not right where I belonged. But I needed them to believe I was. The court-appointed neuropsychologist arrived on a Wednesday. Her name was Dr. Alma Reyes, and she had the kind of stillness about her that I associate with people who have been lied to professionally for long enough that they have learned to wait before forming a conclusion. She spent 4 hours with me. We talked about my career, about Lorraine, about the projects I was most proud of, about what I had eaten for breakfast. She asked me to solve problems. She asked me to remember sequences. She asked me to explain my financial situation as I understood it. I explained it exactly as I understood it, which was thoroughly. At the end, she clicked her pen and said, "Mr. Holt, I am going to recommend to the court that this evaluation does not support a finding of cognitive impairment warranting involuntary guardianship." I thanked her. I was very calm about it. I had not been calm about very many things in the previous 3 weeks. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in a courtroom in downtown Tucson. I wore the suit I had asked Clifton to retrieve from my house, my gray wool one that Lorraine had picked out for me the Christmas before she got sick. Brendan and Teresa were already seated when I walked in with Clifton. I saw Teresa notice me first. She grabbed Brendan's arm. He turned. I had thought about this moment. I had planned for it, the way I plan for everything, methodically and with attention to consequence. I had decided I was not going to give him a dramatic look. I was not going to make it into a scene before the scene. I was simply going to walk to my seat and let the day proceed. But when my son looked at me, I watched the color drain out of his face in a way I had never seen before in 38 years of knowing him, and I understood something I had not fully let myself understand until that moment. He had genuinely believed I would not be there. He had not made any contingency for his father being present in a courtroom. He had planned so carefully for everything that could be documented and recorded and filed, and he had simply not accounted for the possibility that I would find a cell phone inside a Mark Twain anthology and call a man who answers his own phone. Teresa's sister Annette was in the gallery. She stopped looking at her phone when I sat down. The proceedings took most of the morning. Clifton presented the independent assessment. He presented the medication discrepancy documentation and Rosie's statement. He presented the financial records Judith had assembled, showing the convergence of Brendan's debt situation with the timing of my admission. He presented the text messages, The judge was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the expression of someone who had heard a very great number of stories and was capable of identifying the ones that did not hold together. She read the texts twice. She looked up at Brendan over her glasses. "Mr. Jade, Holt," she said to my son, "I am going to give you the opportunity to address the court." Brendan's attorney tried. I will give him that. He argued that the texts were taken out of context. He argued that the medication situation was a documentation error. He argued that Brendan's financial difficulties were entirely unrelated to his concerns about his father's well-being. He was a competent attorney making an incompetent case because the facts were not on his side, and facts, unlike feelings, do not bend under pressure. When the attorney finished, the judge looked at Brendan directly. "I want to hear from you," she said. "Not your counsel, you." Brendan stood up. He looked at me once quickly, then away. He said, "I was worried about my father." The judge waited. "He was alone," Brendan said. "He was grieving. He left the stove on." "Twice," Teresa said from beside him, and the judge turned her gaze to Teresa with an expression that caused Teresa to stop talking immediately. "The stove," the judge repeated. She looked down at the documents in front of her. "Mr. Mintz, Holt, you have a word for the court?" I did. I stood up. My suit felt like the right weight for the moment, like a thing I had chosen deliberately. I thought about Lorraine picking it out in the department store, holding it up against the other gray one and deciding without hesitation. She'd always been better at certainty than I was. I said, "Your Honor, I am 67 years old. I built water treatment facilities and highway overpasses in 3 states. I managed construction teams of 40 people. I raised a son. I cared for my wife through an illness that would have broken most people, and I did it without asking anyone for anything. I left the stove on twice in the worst months of my life. I am not perfect, but I am not incompetent, and I am not confused, and what happened to me at that facility was not care. It was preparation." I looked at Brendan then. He was looking at the table. I said, "I forgive you for being afraid. I do not forgive you for what you did about it." The judge denied the guardianship petition. She ordered an investigation into the prescribing practices at Sunridge Wellness Center. She referred the medication documentation issue to the Arizona Medical Board. She noted for the record that the financial circumstances surrounding the petition raised questions that she was forwarding to the county attorney's office. Teresa cried in the hallway. I do not think they were the kind of tears that mean what tears usually mean. Brendan did not speak to me. He walked out the side door with his attorney, and I watched his back, and I thought about the last time I had seen him before all of this, at Lorraine's burial, when he had stood beside me with his hand on my shoulder, and I had thought, well, at least he is here. Clifton drove me back to my house that afternoon. My house, which still smelled like the lavender sachets Lorraine kept in the linen closet, which still had her reading glasses on the nightstand because I had not been able to move them, which still had the biscuit recipe she had clipped from a magazine tucked into the corner of the kitchen corkboard. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. Then I took the glasses off the nightstand, and I put them somewhere I could see them from the chair where I sit in the morning with my coffee, not because I am holding on, because they are hers, and this is still her house too, and I have earned the right to decide what that means. The investigation into Sunridge resulted in 3 physicians losing their prescribing privileges pending review. Rosie finished her nursing degree and transferred to a hospital system in Flagstaff. August went to live with his son in Colorado after his daughter agreed, in the context of a separate civil proceeding, that this was the correct arrangement. I updated my estate documents with Clifton. The primary beneficiary is now a scholarship fund at the engineering school at the University of Arizona in Lorraine's name. For students who are the first in their families to pursue a technical degree, there is a separate provision for my granddaughter, Brendan's daughter, from his first marriage, who is 12 years old and who I make sure to call every Sunday because she did not choose any of this, and she should know she has a grandfather who shows up. Brendan and I do not speak. I have left the door open, the way you leave a door open when you know the weather might change, but you are not willing to stand in the cold waiting for it. If he knocks, I will answer. But I am not waiting by the door. There are people who will tell you that family is everything, that blood means obligation, that a father should forgive without condition. I have thought about this a great deal in the months since the hearing. I think those people are not wrong exactly. I think they are incomplete. Family is not a contract that only runs in one direction. A father can love a son and still require something of him. A man can grieve the person his son turned out to be without pretending it did not happen. And a person who spent 40 years building things that were meant to hold weight under pressure knows that a structure that has failed its load test is not safe to stand on. No matter how much you might wish otherwise, I still drink my coffee in the morning, and I still watch the light come through the kitchen window the way it always has. And I still talk to Lorraine's photograph sometimes when the house is quiet. I just know now that the quiet is mine, that nobody is going to come in here with a canvas bag and take it from me. That is not a small thing. At 67, after everything, that is not a small thing at all. If you have ever had someone mistake your grief for weakness, leave a comment below. Tell me your city. Tell me you were out there. I read everyone. Stay sharp and watch your packs your bags. This is Walter Holt, signing off. Until next time.